The past 12 months have thrown up challenges that none of us could have possibly envisaged, and each and every one of us has had to adapt to meet these challenges. Because of COVID-19 restrictions, we aren't allowed to embrace one another, but we can embrace technology, and this has given us the opportunity to present this online commemoration. Unfortunately, it isn't possible to invite all our speakers to read poignant messages live as our normal format, but nevertheless, this evening's event is meaningful and we come together in spirit. Yom Hashoah, the day of Holocaust, means catastrophe. The date is the nearest to the 27th of Nisan in the Hebrew calendar, close to Passover, which itself is a story about freedom, and it is a day when Jews inwardly reflect on this stain on humanity. But all of us should pause, reflect, renew, and remember the 6 million Jews murdered by the Nazis, together with others deemed inferior by the Nazis. We will also think about subsequent genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Darfur, right up to the atrocities against the Uyghur Muslims and in Rohingya, and our failure to learn the lessons despite many fine words over the years. The theme of Holocaust Memorial Day 2021 is Be the Light in the Darkness, so we encourage reflection on Jewish resistance during the Holocaust, rescue, justice, the legacy of Holocaust survivors, and the action of educating the next generation to carry these stories forward. And very importantly, we remember those heroes who helped the Jews during the darkest of times, so we can mark the theme, Be the Light in the Darkness. It is now my pleasure to invite the Mayor of Chelmsford, Councillor Jude Deakin, to present a message from Chelmsford City Council.
As Mayor of Chelmsford, I would like to take this opportunity to welcome you to this year's virtual Holocaust Memorial. As a council, we annually support this commemoration, which is organised by Chelmsford's Jewish Community. This is usually held in recognition of the National Holocaust Memorial Day on the 27th of January, a day of remembrance for the millions of victims killed in the Holocaust and other genocides, and is marked each year on the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau. However, whilst we observed the Holocaust Memorial Day, due to the global pandemic, we had to postpone our commemoration event. This year's memorial is being held on Yom Hashoah, which is observed as Israel's day of commemoration for approximately 6 million Jews who perished in the Holocaust, more than 3 million Soviet prisoners of war, 2 million Soviet civilians, over 1 million Poles, more than 1 million Yugoslav civilians, more than 250,000 gypsies, around 70,000 people with mental and physical disabilities, and unknown numbers of political prisoners, resistance fighters, homosexuals and deportees also died in the Holocaust. This is the opportunity for us to remember the lives and communities destroyed by the Nazis and their collaborators in the Holocaust, together with the victims of subsequent genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, Darfur, Syria, Myanmar, and elsewhere. This commemoration offers the opportunity for reflection and a time when we seek to learn the lessons of the past and to recognise that genocide does not just take place on its own. It's a steady process which can begin if discrimination, racism and hatred are not checked and prevented. Unfortunately, discrimination has not ended, nor has the use of the language of hatred or exclusion. There is still much to do to create a safer future, and Holocaust Memorial Day is an opportunity to continue this process. The last year has highlighted the importance in us coming together as a community and supporting one another. Today we come together to remember events of the past and to act upon the lessons learnt. I would like to thank the Chairman of the Jewish Community, Stan Keller, for putting the programme together.
The 27th of January is Holocaust Memorial Day, the International Day of Remembrance for the victims and survivors of the Holocaust, Nazi persecution and subsequent genocides in Cambodia, Bosnia, Rwanda and Darfur. It gives us an opportunity to reflect on the consequences of discrimination and persecution and learn the lessons of the past.
Between 1941 and 1945, the Nazis attempted to annihilate all of Europe's Jews. This systematic and planned genocide is known as the Holocaust. From the time they assumed power in 1933, the Nazis used propaganda, persecution and legislation to deny human and civil rights to Jews. Jews were denied citizenship, forbidden to marry non-Jews, to own businesses and to live in certain areas. The Nazis used centuries of anti-Semitism as their foundation. Nazi persecution extended beyond Jewish people, political opponents, the Roma and Sinti people, disabled people, gay people, Jehovah's Witnesses, Freemasons and black people were all targeted, and hundreds of thousands of people were murdered. By the end of the Holocaust, 6 million Jewish people had been murdered in ghettos, mass shootings, concentration camps and extermination camps.
I was 16-year-old when we arrived in Auschwitz-Birkenau. Within a minute, I got separated from my mother and 2 sisters. A few minutes later, I got separated from my father. I had no opportunity to say goodbye to them. And from that day onwards, I never saw them again.
After Auschwitz, Eugene was imprisoned at the Buchenwald concentration camp. He was forced to work in the tunnels at the Dora Mittelbau labour camp and was finally imprisoned in the concentration camp at Bergen-Belsen.
The scenes in Bergen-Belsen were terrible. There were dead bodies lying all over. The place was infected by typhus. I personally came down to 5 stone.
For 50 years, Eugene said nothing of his ordeals, but now he speaks regularly about the atrocities that he experienced in his youth. In doing so, he has joined a group of survivors who work extremely hard to make sure that the Holocaust will never be forgotten.
I've been speaking to universities, colleges, schools for 65 years, ever since I came over to this country in 1946. I've made numerous films about the Holocaust, particularly about Auschwitz, about my time on the Death March, and I have even taken some neo-Nazis back to the camp. It is very important that people understand what happened and learn something from what happened in the past, because we have no guarantee today that it cannot happen again. We believe it can happen to anyone, anywhere, at any time.
Sadly, in the years that have passed since the end of the Holocaust, the world has seen genocide take place again and again. In the 1970s, the Khmer Rouge systematically evicted the population of Cambodia from its towns and cities and forced everyone to work on huge collective farms. Anyone who refused or moved too slowly was killed.
For 3 years, 8 months and 20 days, we were forced to labor, to work in the rice field, from sunrise to sunset, with only 2 bowls of rice soup a day. Jenny, my daughter, was 9 when she died, and she died of starvation because I had not enough rice to give her to her. To look at your daughter slowly dying of starvation, this is really hard for a mother, and I will never forget this.
In Cambodia, the number of people murdered reached 2 million. In Rwanda, using little more than clubs and machetes, members of the Hutu people massacred almost 1 million men, women, children and babies who belonged to either the Tutsi people or moderate Hutus.
It was 10 o'clock in the morning when the militias come to attack in our house, and I managed to escape, just jumping through the window, but my family couldn't make it. I climbed the tree, which was in the backyard. I could hear the sound of crying and mourning inside the house. But unfortunately, a few minutes later, those sound has stopped. That's when I knew everybody was dead.
In former Yugoslavia, the Serbs targeted Bosnia in their wish for political domination. They were prepared to achieve this by isolating and even exterminating ethnic groups.
I was taken away together with my brother and the rest of the villagers, and I ended up in the Yomorska concentration camp. During my stay in the Yomorska camp, I was treated worse than a rat. My life was worth less than life of a rat. The worst aspect of being kept in the Yomorska camp was the fact that the place was guarded by my former schoolmates, former neighbours, former policemen whose protection I relied before the war, and even former teachers.
But lessons remain unlearned. Genocide is still taking place today. Right now, in the Darfur region of Sudan, against a backdrop of civil war and with the backing of the Sudanese government, members of the Arab population are currently persecuting black African farmers who they see as inferior people. To date, millions of people have been displaced and hundreds of thousands of men, women and children have been murdered in Darfur. On Holocaust Memorial Day, we have a chance to think about what we can do to put an end to persecution and discrimination.
We will now watch segments from the Yom Hashoah commemoration in 2019, held at the Holocaust Memorial in Hyde Park. Firstly is Rebecca Lewis, representing the Union of British Students.
My name's Rebecca Lewis, and I'm here representing the Union of Jewish Students. I returned from March of the Living 2019 on Friday, and myself, together with 300 other UK participants, were lucky enough to be joined by survivors of the Holocaust as we learnt about Jewish life in Poland before, during and after the Holocaust. On Yom Hashoah, we marched from Auschwitz I to Auschwitz-Birkenau with 11,000 other people from around the world. We marched on Yom Hashoah to celebrate life. This incredibly moving and enriching experience taught me that we must remember today, tomorrow, and every day after the atrocities of the Holocaust, so we ensure never, ever again. The full name for our communal Remembrance Day is Yom Hashoah veHagavura, which translates as the Day of Remembrance of the Holocaust and the Heroism. The original Hebrew date chosen to mark Yom Hashoah was to fall on the anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, to remind us that it is not only important to remember the victims of the Holocaust, but to also pay tribute to its Jewish heroes and their many acts of bravery and often martyrdom. 76 years ago, on the 19th of April 1943, on the eve of Pesach, the Germans entered the Warsaw Ghetto, intending to begin the final liquidation. They were met with fierce resistance. In response to earlier deportations, several underground organizations had formed. The Jewish Combat Organization and the Jewish Military Union worked together to oppose attempts to destroy the ghetto. They obtained weapons. Not much in comparison to the Nazis' weaponry, but weapons all the same. Armed with pistols and small explosives, for 4 weeks, these resistance movements fought back, resisting with all they had and stalling the Nazi plans to liquidate the ghetto. Despite the incredible bravery of those in the ghetto, on May 16, 1943, the Germans brutally ended the uprising. 7,000 Jews died fighting or hiding in the ghetto during the 4-week uprising. In his final letter before he was murdered, the leader of the uprising, Mordechai Anilevitz, wrote, "I feel that what we have dared to do is of enormous significance. The dream has been fulfilled. Jewish self-defense in the ghetto has become a fact. Jewish armed resistance and revenge has become a reality. I have been witness to the magnificent, heroic fighting of Jewish men in battle." News from the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising quickly spread and inspired poet and partisan Hirsch Glick to write the lyrics "Zog nit ken mo," never say this is the final road for you. Zog nit ken mo became an anthem of defiance. Jewish partisans in the forests and ghettos of Lithuania, Belarus, and Poland sang this song to fortify their courage and to celebrate their victories against the Nazis. We are privileged to hear the partisan song be performed today.
We will now hear testimonies from Holocaust survivors, accompanied by Shir, the group who gave us such a wonderful evening of klezmer music at the Crampon Theatre in June 2019.
Auf en Pripatschik brennt a Feiere und im Stub is heiß und der Rebel ein kleiner Kinderlach dem Aleph Beis und der Rebel ein kleiner Kinderlach dem Aleph Beis. Seht sche Kinderlach de gensche Teiere, was sie lernen do. Sag she noch einmal und tage noch einmal, kommet's Aleph O. Sag she noch einmal und tage noch einmal, kommet's Aleph O.
To be quite honest with you, from the age of 8, this was the happiest part of my life. I used to get 110 kroners pocket money, and I would spend most of the money on tickets to the opera, which I absolutely loved. The town itself was a beautiful place, but the opera house and the theater were extraordinary. I would go there with my boyfriend. He introduced me to it. But remember, we stood right at the top. Otherwise, our money would have been spent much quicker. To this day, I am a very keen opera lover. I love the music, and the romantic arias are just incredible. Verdi, Puccini, they are amazing. I know every one of them. Eva Behar, born Romania, 1925.
I had a happy childhood. As an only child, I was spoiled and indulged. I must have been one of the most photographed babies in the country, taken to professional photographers practically every week of the first years of my life. My parents must have loved me very much. I have happy memories of playing with them and being taken out by them. Novi Sad is on the banks of the Danube with a sandy beach, and I remember going swimming in the Danube in the summer. There are photos of us there in 1943 and 1944 in a family photo album. Ivan Shaw, born in Yugoslavia in 1939.
My mother used to love dressing me as a Bavarian peasant boy when I was little. One day on holiday, I was playing by the paddling pool in my Lederhose. I was the only child with a swimming doll that could actually do the crawl when wound up by its arms. I bent down too low and I fell into the water. I was so stunned that I just stayed sitting there until some lady told my sister, who as usual was engrossed in a book, that her little brother had fallen into the water. Little brother, my sister was thinking. Oh, could she mean my sister? I shall never forget the squelching sounds of my leather boots made at each step as I was walked back to the hotel and put to bed. Margaret Stern, born in Germany, 1925.
We lived in a very nice flat in the center of Vienna with my maternal grandparents. Well, obviously we were Jewish, but very much assimilated, and religion played very little part in my childhood, although we did belong to a synagogue. As far as friends were concerned, some were Christian, others were Jewish. It made no difference. I was doing very much the same as other children. I regularly went to the playgrounds and to the parks. I was invited to other people's and other children's homes, and of course they were invited to us. Religion was immaterial, and it was all quite normal. I thought at the time that that's how life is and how it would go on. I had no suspicion of what was to come. But even as a very young child, I heard parents talking about a man called Hitler. But he was a very nasty man, but nothing to worry about because he was in Germany. And we were in Austria. And Austria was a very different country from Germany. George Vulcan, born Austria, 1929.
Sag schon noch einmal und Tage noch einmal, komm jetzt alle vor. Sag schon noch einmal und Tage noch einmal, komm jetzt alle vor.
Five Jewish children's choirs will sing the anthem Never Again, remembering that 1.5 million Jewish children never had the opportunity to sing.
They stood so brave, what did they know?
Some thoughts from the 75th anniversary event in 2020.
All of our survivors who are still with us and able to share their testimonies are so vital. They are brilliant people who are determined to carry on sharing their testimony while they still can.
The dwindling number of survivors from the Nazi death camps at Auschwitz today led commemorations to mark the 75th anniversary of their liberation.
75 years since the liberation of Auschwitz, 75 years since the world started to become aware of the atrocities of the Holocaust.
200 find the courage to come back to the place the Nazis never meant them to leave.
They are united in their message, never again.
This could well be the last major gathering of Holocaust survivors of its kind.
The Holocaust must never be allowed to become simply a fact of history. We must never cease to be appalled nor moved by the testimony of those who lived through it.
The circumstances we're living through now have the potential to create the conditions in which we live through a period of hatred again.
I still get shocked when I post something about the Holocaust and I immediately get abuse.
Those words burn. They burn deep. And they're deeply dispiriting, and they play on a very well-hidden fear a lot of Jewish people have, that someday anti-Semitism will rise up once more.
Bergen-Belsen, another of the infamous concentration camps, was liberated by the British on the 15th of April 1945, followed by testimonies from Hansu Mahler, a Rohingya refugee, and Helen Aronson, a Holocaust survivor.
This is the testimony of Hansu Mahler, a Rohingya Muslim from Myanmar. She grew up in Tulatoli, where the Burmese military committed a massacre in 2017. Hansu and her family escaped to a refugee camp in Bangladesh. The treatment of us Muslims was getting gradually worse and worse. In August 2017, the military were closely guarding and watching our village for no reason. Every few days, they would round all of us up. They would choose people at random, claiming they were suspicious characters. They would beat some, throw some into jail. We were living in fear. Whenever we would hear that the military is coming, everyone would be afraid and hide in the hills. If they saw a pretty girl, they would go after her and rape her. We witnessed how they beat, cut, and slaughtered all the innocent people. They made the Rohingya people dig their own graves. All the able-bodied men were told to dig the holes. In that hole, they threw all the bodies. They poured gasoline into the hole all over the bodies and set it ablaze. We saw everything they were doing. They have killed so many of us. Can you imagine how we feel?
My mother, brother, and I stayed together, but we were separated from my father. We never saw him again.
This is a memorial prayer. O God, who art full of compassion, who dwellest on high, grant perfect rest in thy divine presence to all the souls of our holy and pure brethren, whose blood was spilt by the murderers in Auschwitz, Belzec, Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, Majdanek, Sobibor, Treblinka, and other extermination camps in Europe, who were killed, strangled, burned and buried alive for the sanctification for thy name, for whose souls we now pray. May their resting place be in the Garden of Eden. May the Master of Mercy shelter them in the shadow of his wings for eternity, and may he bind their souls in the bond of love. Amen. Hashem is their heritage, and may they repose in peace in their resting places. Now let us say, Amen. In Chelmsford, we light these candles in honour of all the innocent victims, Jewish and non-Jewish, who perished in the Holocaust, including 1.5 million children, and in honour of all the righteous people who attempted to save Jewish lives during the Holocaust, despite the danger to themselves.
My hope for the Holocaust Memorial Day is for the people to learn about the genocide so that it won't happen again.
The more people commemorate the Holocaust on Holocaust Memorial Day, the more awareness there will be of the dangers and the more people will learn.
I hope that the Holocaust Memorial Day can inspire people, especially young people, to understand that they can make a difference, that one person can make a difference.
I want to ask young people, as they are the decision makers of the future, to learn the lessons of the past so that these crimes will never happen again.
My dearest wish and hope is for us to live in harmony, to respect each other, and learn to live and let live.
We all have the opportunity to use Holocaust Memorial Day to learn the lessons of the past to create a safer, better future.
Eili, sung by Sophia Millman, composed by Hannah Shenish in 1944. Hannah was a Hungarian Jew who emigrated to Israel in 1939. She was trained by the British Army and parachuted into Yugoslavia in World War II to help save the Jews of Hungary. She was captured and tortured, but never revealed details of her mission, and was shot dead in November 1944. In my closing remarks today, which are intended to be thought-provoking, I have included thoughts of prominent rabbis Moshe Friedman and Marvin Heer, with my own views in the fight against discrimination. Holocaust Memorial Day marks the anniversary of the date in 1945 when Soviet troops burst into Auschwitz-Birkenau death camp, pinnacle of Nazi Germany's final solution of the Jewish question, that introduced organised, industrialised mass murder to the so-called civilised world. VE Day followed shortly after, but the remnants of European Jews who somehow survived had little to celebrate. 6 million of their brothers and sisters, parents, grandparents, families and friends were dehumanised, starved to death or gassed and buried and burned at Auschwitz and other concentration camps, even if they got that far. Ordinary people like you and I. In 2005, the United Nations designated January the 27th as International Holocaust Memorial Day to commemorate the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau. Bergen-Belsen was liberated on the 15th of April 1945, so a date very close to this evening. Every year, many countries, institutions of higher learning, faith leaders and families of Holocaust victims participate in Remembrance Day activities. But in 2021, it is not clear that these gatherings are having any impact in the real world. So the question that needs to be addressed is, are we approaching Holocaust education in the right way? There are thousands of memorials, wreath-laying ceremonies, pious speeches, annual themes, moments of silence and political proclamations meant to ensure that, at least for a few minutes, many will remember. But the facts on the ground warn us that we are forgetting how it all began, with unchallenged words and hate. We forget the cultural and sports elites, physicians, lawyers, pundits and businessmen in Germany and across Europe and the Americas, who were eager to appease Hitler, to collude with the Nazis, and who remained indifferent to the growing threats and suffering of the Jews. Holocaust education was never meant to be exclusively about the survival of the Jews or the injustices that were perpetrated against them. It was about global human decency, morality and justice. The clarion call of never again cannot only mean never again to the Jews. To carry its full moral weight, it must mean never again to anyone. If we remain silent in the face of the flagrant abuse and persecution against Uyghur Muslims in China, if we turn away from the dehumanization of one group of people because of their religion and religious practices, we will be repeating the mistakes of history, and in doing so, we will have failed in one of our most fundamental moral duties. The test of our moral self-worth is not how much we share the sentiment of Holocaust education. It is whether we are prepared to act and bear testimony to the victims of persecution. Silence is capitulation, and capitulation is immoral. We need to pressure social media platforms to stop failing to degrade the marketing capabilities of hate groups and terrorists, whilst they maintain a silence as ethnic cleansing continues against Iraqi Christians and the genocides of Yazidis, to name a few examples. Iran's supreme leader actually uses the word final solution, aimed at the 6 million plus Jews living in Israel, a direct mantra from the Nazi Third Reich, and yet nothing is said by the world's leaders. Where is the outrage as a new generation of Iranians parades through the streets of Tehran shouting, "Auschwitz is a lie"? For Jews, never again meant the hope that after the Shoah, Jews would never stand alone, that they could rely on a coalition of democratic European nations and the West to be a bulwark against history's oldest hate. The bitter reality is that anti-Semitism is on the rise in Europe and North America. Jews are having to leave in thousands as they no longer feel safe. In France, violent anti-Semitism has risen by 74%, in Germany 60%, in Canada 16.5%, and in the United States, anti-Semitic assaults doubled. Across the world, anti-Semitic attacks rose 13% in 2018. In the USA last year, 62% of all religion-based hate crimes targeted 2% of the nation's population, the American Jews, and their synagogues and schools. If we look for optimistic shoots, then we must surely rejoice that peace has broken out between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco and Sudan. Bahrain has affirmed the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, which includes virulent anti-Zionism. But there is no peace or even ceasefire on university campuses where Jewish students continue to be demonized and ostracized, ostensibly because of their support for the Jewish state, which is conflated with anti-Semitism. There are so many instances of anti-Semitism I could cite from around the world. Synagogues in Los Angeles and Oakland, California, and Kenosha, Wisconsin were targeted. Chabad houses in Portland, Oregon, and Newark, Delaware were destroyed by arson. The mayor of Recoleta in Chile's capital, Santiago, charges Jews' control of the media and dual loyalty. Almost a year to the day of the Halle synagogue attack, a religious student was gravely wounded by a neo-Nazi outside a Hamburg synagogue. France now holds the dubious honour of being the most dangerous place for Jews amongst European nations, whilst as recently as 1978, violence against Jews was virtually unknown in France, and a poll said only 4% would object to their children marrying a Jew. In Britain last October, a far-right network that calls itself 100 Handers produced and placed anti-Semitic stickers in Jewish and non-Jewish areas. They placed razor blades behind the stickers to cause physical harm to add to the mental anguish. All over the world, Jewish gravestones have been desecrated. A Jewish cemetery in Madrid was vandalised at Christmas. A good Jew is a dead Jew, spray painted on doors and walls. All of the above examples are the tip of the iceberg. Home Office statistics show that an average of over 3 hate crimes are directed at Jews every single day in England and Wales, with Jews almost 4 times more likely to be targets of hate crimes than any other faith group. Baroness Deitch, honorary patron of Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, has warned political leaders against passive acts of commemoration on Holocaust Memorial Day, calling instead for them to commit to protecting Jewish communities from violence and hatred. The Equality and Human Rights Commission published its damning findings into anti-Semitism in the Labour Party last year. The substantive steps Baroness Deitch suggested might include wider adoption of the international definition of anti-Semitism, including at universities, more funding and training to secure Jewish community institutions, and more resources for education about the Jewish story in order to inoculate against anti-Semitism before it starts. Most worryingly is a new investigation by the Community Security Trust, which has detailed widespread anti-Semitism at British universities. This report said that over the past 2 academic years, there had been 123 anti-Semitic incidents perpetrated by students, academic staff, union officials, and student society officers. Not for nothing was there a Hitler Youth. The seeds we plant can bear monstrous fruit. In Chelmsford, as I have said on many an occasion, we are fortunate to live in a tolerant community, but we have seen how quickly things can change. Because of circumstances, this has been a different sort of commemoration and given us the opportunity to look at how old ways of working are not always the best. The International Holocaust Remembrance Day and Yom Hashoah must be about more than remembrance. It must be more than a tick box exercise to make us all feel better. It must be about action, before it is too late. Finally, I would like to thank the Mayor of Chelmsford and members of Chelmsford City Council for their support and for helping putting this commemoration together.